Well, welcome to Chapter 11 and testing. You know what I really like watching on TV? I like watching Bear Grylls, a guy that goes out into the middle of nowhere and can survive under any circumstances. I also like watching Jeopardy. I liked when Ken Jennings was on, winning all that money on his big run. I don't remember how many months he was on. So the question then becomes, is one of those guys smarter than the other? That's what Chapter 11 is all about, really looking at intelligence and how we define intelligence, how a society views intelligence, a culture looks at intelligence, and how do we even measure intelligence. So let's get into it, and we'll talk about those quotes in class. One of the first people that comes around looking at intelligence and measuring it, and one of the first names that you need to know, is a guy by the name of Charles Spearman. And he comes up with the idea of the G factor, which is this idea that there is a main underlying factor that deals with all of our, or indicates all of our intelligent mental activity. So, best way that I've heard about this, or the best analogy that I've heard, is just think of an athlete. If an athlete is really good at football, and then they go out and they play baseball as well, and then they play some golf, and then they play some soccer, they're probably going to be pretty good at all of those different sports. Even though they're really good at football, and they might not be as good at those other sports as they are at football, they're going to still probably be pretty darn good at those other sports, right? That makes sense. And they're definitely going to be better at those sports, most likely, than somebody that doesn't really participate in any activities. They live a very sedentary lifestyle, etc. That's the G factor as far as cognition is concerned and intelligence, according to Charles Spearman. Even if we're really good at one cognitive ability, say, we'll just use school as an example. So we're really good at English. Spearman thought we would probably be fairly good at other subjects as well. We might be stronger at English, but we'll be decent. And if we're not so good at one subject, we're probably not being great at other subjects as well. Okay, so there's this kind of consistency in the way when we take a cognitive test and it's measuring different cognitive abilities, there's going to be some sort of consistency how we score in those different cognitive abilities. So as you can see there, the correlation between all mental tests, no matter the subjects. Most IQ tests measure the G. Mr. Woodard will talk about IQ tests on the next one. However, that becomes a problem because we have folks like savants who are incredibly good, like unbelievably good at one area, but can't do other things. We'll watch this video in class. This is a gentleman who the movie Rain Man was based on. I mean, this is a guy that can, off the top of his head, tell you who won the 1926 World Series. He can tell you the starting pitcher. He can tell you the final score. He can probably tell you the count that happened in the fourth inning when a home run was hit. It's phenomenal. And yet, he can't button his shirt. He can't live a daily experience without his father helping him. So it raises some questions about this idea of a G factor and like this common intelligence factor. So then we get back into how I started the video and really starting to look at, well, wait a minute, is Bear Grylls smarter than Ken Jennings? Can you compare the intelligence of Bear Grylls and Ken Jennings? If we talk about my athlete example, the football player being good at these other sports, does that mean that the football player who takes a cognitive test, will he score well on those cognitive tests as well? Or are we kind of measuring apples and oranges looking at athletics and cognition? You can see all the questions that are fostered here when we're looking at intelligence. So a guy by the name of Howard Gardner comes along and he comes up with his multiple intelligences. He starts to kind of break this idea of intelligence down into different categories. So the first one that you can see there on your screen is linguistic. This is pretty basic for us. These are our usual comprehension and vocabulary tests. Logical mathematical, thinking in terms of the math world, being particularly adept at using analogies and figuring out logic problems, word problems, those kinds of things. Spatial thinking, folks that are good at spatial intelligence, spatial reasoning, they see the world in 3D. They understand the world around them in 3D. They can form mental 3D images of a particular object in their mind. So they're good about relationships in space. They're good in thinking in those terms. Musical, they're folks that are good with musical intelligence. They can hear tone really well. They can hear that timbre very well. They can distinguish those things. They have just an adeptness at being able to do that. Bodily kinesthetic, you can go back to our athlete example there. Folks that have that bodily kinesthetic, think in terms of their minds and their bodies coordinate very well. They learn through their bodies. So you'll hear about a kinesthetic learner, somebody that learns really well with hands-on. They like to manipulate things with their hands, and that's how they learn the material, whether it be a linguistic or a logic problem. They learn with their that kinesthetic feel. And then the last couple on this particular slide, inter and intrapersonal. Just go back to your freshman year roots and stems. Inter means between. So interpersonal intelligence, being good at picking up on other people's emotions, being adept at understanding them, having that empathy for them, understanding why they're behaving in a certain way. Intrapersonal intelligence is understanding why we behave in a particular way, being able to really reflect on oneself and understanding one's own emotions. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, there's also a naturalistic intelligence that he adds to this. And there are some others that are debated, a spiritual one. We're not going to worry about that. But the naturalistic one will pop up every once in a while. And those are folks that are very good at identifying things in nature. Jane Goodall with the chimpanzees is a name that pops up in that particular intelligence. Being able to relate to nature and the natural world, and having, again, that adeptness that other people might not have as much. So that leads us to this idea of emotional intelligence, particularly, I should say, those last two, inter and intrapersonal. Having this emotional intelligence, this isn't coined by Gardner. This is something that comes a little bit later. But this idea of perceiving emotions and being able to really recognize emotions in a literary work, for instance, or, of course, with people that you're around. Being able to predict how somebody might be able to behave because you're understanding their emotions. Not because somebody is just rip-roaring mad and you know what they're going to do because they're super mad, but being able to really distinguish some of the more subtle aspects of somebody else's intelligence. And again, being able to understand and identify subtle aspects of our own intelligence, or I should say our own emotions. Being able to manage emotions really well. Somebody with high emotional intelligence, again, can not only understand their emotions, but can manage their emotions quite well and use their emotions for benefit. Use the emotions in either interpersonal relationships or creative thinking, problem solving, etc. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop there. That gets us rolling just with that notion of what is intelligence and how do we define intelligence? How do we break it down? Gave you a couple of big names with Spearman and Gardner. Mr. Woodard will now go into measuring intelligence.